Every man at the Pratt County Equipment Consignment in Saratoga, Kansas, on the third Saturday of March, 1987, looked at the same machine. It was a 1961 Allis-Chalmers All-Crop 60 combine harvester. Serial plate nearly gone. The header warped where it had struck something years back. The feeder house seized so hard the previous owner had given up and chained the whole thing to a fence post for 11 years. The grain tank had a rust through the size of a pie plate on the starboard side. The tires held air, but just barely. The engine had not turned over since Gerald Ford was president, or so the man running the consignment told people, and nobody doubted him. Every man looked at the same machine. They saw the same thing. And they were all wrong. The only person at that sale who saw something different was 16 years old, stood 5 feet 6 inches in his work boots, and had driven 41 miles in a 1974 Ford F-100 with a cracked exhaust manifold to be there. His name was Darrell Swick. He had $25 in his shirt pocket, a baling wire tie looped around the left wrist the way his grandfather wore one, and a small green notebook that had belonged to the same man. The dealers had been wrong about combines for a long time. That Saturday, they saw no reason to start being right. Stories like this don't get told much anymore. If you grew up around people who worked with their hands and didn't say much about it, hit subscribe. We're going to keep telling them as long as you keep watching. The sale started at 9 in the morning. Harlan Veach, who ran equipment consignments in Pratt County the way a pharmacist fills prescriptions, carefully, without sentiment, had laid the field out in 2 long rows, something like 40 pieces total, from a serviceable 1979 John Deere 4440 down through a succession of plows, disc harrows, cultivators, and at the far end of the second row, the Allis-Chalmers. It had been consigned by the estate of a farmer named Hubert Goss, who had died the previous December. The combine had not been part of Goss's operation since 1975. It had sat in the same fence corner, in the same Kansas wind, for those 11 years. The morning was cold. 31 degrees at 9, warming toward 45 by noon. The mud in the low parts of the field had not fully thawed, and a man's boot could break through the frozen crust every few steps and pull up gray-brown clay in a plug. There were perhaps 80 men at the sale, most of them over 40, most of them in coveralls or insulated canvas chore coats, most of them with a coffee from the aluminum urn that Veach's wife had set on the tailgate of their Silverado. A few grain elevator managers, 2 parts dealers from Pratt, and 1 from Kingman, a farm implement dealer named Boyd Stuttle, who had driven over from Stafford County with no particular intent to buy anything, just to see what was moving and what wasn't. There was one boy. Darrell Swick had come from the place that would have embarrassed most of the men at that sale, had they known it. Not poor. Exactly. The Swick family ran 84 acres of dryland wheat in Rice County and made what they made and did not complain about it. His father, Glenn Swick, had a bad left knee from a combine accident in 1968 that had not been properly set, and he walked with a slight drag that worsened in cold weather. Glenn did not come to the sale. He had not known Doral was going. The green notebook went back further than Glenn. Darrell's grandfather, Everett Swick, had started keeping it in 1949. Everett had gone to work at a Massey Harris dealership in Hutchinson, straight out of the Army, spent 6 years there learning the mechanical language of harvesting equipment, cylinder speeds, concave clearances, the particular failure modes of feeder houses across 3 decades of design changes, and then gone back to farming. He kept the notebook the same way a doctor keeps notes on patients, organized by machine type, with dates and measurements and shorthand only he could entirely parse. When Everett died in 1983, The notebook passed to Glenn, who could not read the shorthand and left it in the kitchen drawer. Darrell found it that winter, when he was 13. He had spent 3 years decoding it, a section at a time, cross-referencing against a 1956 dealer's service manual he had bought for $4 at a farm sale in Lyons. By the time he was 16, Darrell Swick knew more about what made an all-crop 60 fail, and what made it fixable, than anyone in Pratt County likely suspected. He knew that the feeder house chain on that generation of machine was almost always the cause of a seized drive, and that the chain itself was still being manufactured by an aftermarket supplier out of Illinois. He knew the cylinder concave wore in a particular pattern that a man with a feeler gauge and a straight edge could assess in under 10 minutes. He knew the grain tank rust on the starboard corner was almost never structural. The corner post was a separate piece welded on. And the tank itself, if the bottom was sound, was repairable with sheet tin and a MIG welder. He had called the Allis-Chalmers service line in Milwaukee, posing as a dealer the previous October, asking about parts availability. The man on the other end had been helpful, unhelpfully so, from the perspective of what Darrell was about to do. He didn't know if it would work. He just felt like it might. Veach ran the sale in order, starting with the John Deere 4440, which brought $19,500 to a farmer from Kingman County named Decker, and working down through implements in a rhythm that took about 3 minutes per lot. By the time he reached the all-crop 60, it was 20 minutes to noon, and most of the crowd had already made their decisions, and some had already left. Boyd Stuttle, the implement dealer from Stafford County, was standing perhaps 10 feet from Darrell when Veach started his patter on the combine. Stuttle said, loud enough for the men around him to hear, that a man would need a truck and a winch just to get the thing off the property. That was not unkind. It was the truth as Stuttle understood it. He had been selling and buying farm equipment for 22 years, and he understood the economics. Anything that required significant capital to restore before it could work was worth the restoration cost minus whatever you could sell it for afterward. And if that math came out negative, you walked away. The math on the Allis-Chalmers, by every normal calculation, came out negative. The head cylinder was seized. The header was bent. The engine was unknown. Parts for a 30-year-old combine came dear and slow, and labor costs ate whatever margin remained. Stuttle had been right about combines before, more often than not. He watched them, steadied his breath, opened the green notebook to a page near the middle. Veach opened the bidding at $100. A brief silence. $50, he said. The crowd said nothing. $25, said Harlan Veach, with the flat resignation of a man who has watched the public vote with its feet. Darrell Swick raised his hand. The men nearest him turned. A few didn't turn, just shifted their eyes. Stuttle turned fully. $25, said Veach, with the same tone he would use if he were reading a milk price from a bulletin board. Going once. The crowd was quiet. Going twice. Still quiet. He looked out at a field of men who had decided, every one of them, that the Allis-Chalmers was not worth the trouble. Sold, said Veach. He looked at the boy. He did not say anything else. Darrell wrote a check on his father's account for exactly $25. He had cleared it with Glenn that morning without saying much about what the money was for. Glenn had not asked. There was a quality to that silence that Darrell had grown up inside of. Not indifference, something quieter than that. Getting the combine home was the first problem. He borrowed a neighbor's flatbed trailer and a come-along from his uncle in McPherson. The tires, miraculously, held. The combine did not fight the loading badly. He had it in the backfield of the Swick place by 4 in the afternoon. The feeder house chain took 11 days to free. Penetrating oil. Heat from a propane torch. Patience. He soaked it, worked it, soaked it again, heated it in short passes the way a man coaxes a rusted bolt instead of breaking it. The chain itself, when it finally moved, was worn but intact. 2 links at the upper drive had mushroomed slightly, which he replaced with links from the Illinois supplier that cost $9. 14 including shipping. The engine was a separate job, a Chrysler Industrial 6-cylinder, underappreciated then and forgotten now. But parts for it were still available through a salvage network his grandfather's notebook had described in a passage dated 1961. The water pump was seized. The carburetor was rebuilt by a man in Pratt named Dale Rickenbeck, who did small engine work out of a machine shed and charged $38 for it, which Darrell considered fair. The main bearings were soft, but not gone. The header was the only part he did not fix himself. He found a good used header for an all-crop 60 at a salvage yard outside Hutchinson for $110. He drove out on a Saturday morning, inspected it, bought it, hauled it home on the borrowed trailer, and bolted it on in an afternoon. Total cost, counting the purchase price, $194. 87. He had it from the money he made bucking hay bales the previous summer at $2. 50 per hour from a farmer named Kenny Pruitt, whose operation ran to 300 acres of alfalfa in the Arkansas River bottom. He did not know if anyone would hire the machine for custom cutting. He had not planned beyond fixing it. That was not a strategy, exactly. It was more the way his grandfather had lived. You saw a thing that wanted doing, and you did it, and you worried about the rest when the rest arrived. The rest arrived in June. A neighbor 2 miles north, a man named Walt Dempsey, who farmed 240 acres of wheat and did not own a combine, had been hiring a custom cutter from Liberal for 4 years running. The Liberal cutter charged $12 per acre. Dempsey had 240 acres and did not love the math. He came by the Swick place in the second week of June, having heard something from someone, and looked at the all-crop 60 in the field where Darrell had parked it after the last test run. He looked at it for a while. Darrell told him $10 per acre. Dempsey looked at the machine. He looked at the boy. He said he would try one field and see. The Alice Chalmers ran for 4 days straight, cutting Dempsey's winter wheat and then 3 other farms in Rice County whose operators had heard about the rate. It threw a belt once, which Darrell replaced from spares he had coiled on the floor of the truck cab. The cylinder speed needed adjusting for a field of heavy-headed Jagger wheat that one farmer was running, and Darrell adjusted it from memory of a page in the notebook, and the field ran clean. At $10 per acre across 4 operations that summer, the combine grossed just under $2,400. After fuel, oil, and the belt, Darrell cleared $2,207. He bought a second machine the following spring. This one was a 1966 International Harvester 403, which was in better shape than the Alice Chalmers had been, and cost him $175 at an estate sale in Pawnee County. He fixed it in 6 weeks and had it running custom cuts by June. He hired his cousin to run one while he ran the other. By the end of that summer, he had cleared just over $5,800. He was 17. Darrell Swick is 54 years old now. He runs a custom farming operation across 3 counties and a farm equipment restoration business that employs 7 people. He owns 1,140 acres of dryland wheat and corn ground in Rice and Pratt counties, which he bought in parcels over 15 years. Some of it from estates, some of it from men who were carrying debt they could not service after the 1990s pulled the price out of wheat for most of a decade. A few of those men had been at the Pratt County Equipment Consignment on the 3rd Saturday of March, 1987. Boyd Stuttle the implement dealer from Stafford County, heard what had happened in the years after and told someone the story himself. He was not embarrassed by having called the combine a winch job. He had been right about the winch. He had been wrong about everything after that, and he was honest about the difference. The green notebook is framed under glass in Daryl's machine shop in Lyons. Visitors ask about it, and Daryl tells them some of what it is. Not everything. Some of it he still can't entirely read, and he has decided he doesn't need to. What Everett Swick put down in that notebook between 1949 and 1981 was not just a record of machines. It was a record of what a man pays attention to across a working life when he believes that paying attention is the work itself. The machine cost $25. What it ran on was something else, and that was never for sale at any price.